Judge Hollings signed a seizure order against my newly bought lake. I bought an old Wyoming lake to finally breathe easy, but the moment I arrived, the HOA slapped their sign on my shoreline and tried to seize it like I didn't exist. Every step I took uncovered something worse. Forged orders, poisoned water, midnight dumping, until the day federal helicopters broke over the ridge. If you love seeing truth win over bullies, hit subscribe and stick with me. This one's a ride. The gravel road twisted through the pines like an old riverbed, each turn carrying me deeper into country that hadn't changed since my grandfather's time. Wyoming mornings always smelled the same: pine sap, cold stone, and that faint metallic breath of water just over the ridge. As my truck crested the final rise, the lake came into view, its surface catching the early sun like a sheet of hammered silver. My lake, the first true piece of quiet I'd bought in years. But the quiet didn't last. Right at the entrance to the old access path, where the previous owner's weather-beaten sign once hung, stood a brand new post. Fresh lumber, freshly drilled holes, and a sign that didn't belong in wilderness. Thick aluminum, bright white paint, reflective lettering bold as a slap. Private property, Silver Basin. HOA Lake Authority. On a lake miles outside any neighborhood? I put the truck in park, engine ticking softly as it cooled in the mountain air. For a moment I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the sign shimmer in the sun like it was daring me to disagree with it. The realtor, Dorothy, had told me the property was simple: clean title, water rights intact, lake included, no encroachments, no easements, no surprises. Yet here was a surprise bold enough to punch through a windshield. I stepped out, boots crunching over frost-touched dirt. The lake spread out below like a quiet promise, framed by tall firs and a few scattered boulders left by glaciers ages ago. Everything felt right, natural, untouched. Whoever put that sign here didn't belong. As I made my way down the narrow footpath toward the small wooden pier, a metallic click echoed across the water, then another. Footsteps. Fast. "You!" a voice snapped, sharp as barbed wire. "Step away from the shoreline right now!" A woman in a blinding fuchsia windbreaker marched down the pier with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Silver hair molded into a sculpted bob, lips tight, eyes burning with misplaced ownership. Behind her, two men in matching jackets followed like agitated bookends. She didn't slow down, didn't smile, didn't breathe. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, planting herself between me and the lake like she planned to body block the entire shoreline. "This water is controlled by the Silver Basin Homeowners Association. You cannot be here." I blinked. Once. Slowly. "Ma'am, I own this lake." "You most certainly do not." The two men nodded behind her like malfunctioning bobbleheads. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the heavy paper deed, the kind printed on that stiff, almost cloth-like stock. The county seal caught the sunlight. The purchase price, the parcel number, the lake boundaries, all of it legitimate, paid in full 2 weeks ago. "I paid $410,000 for this property," I said evenly, "including the water you're standing next to." She didn't even look at the document. Not once. Instead, she lifted her chin and jabbed a manicured finger toward the ridge. "We amended jurisdiction last month. The HOA now controls all recreational waters within a 3-mile perimeter of Silver Basin Estates. This lake is part of our Environmental Enhancement Zone." Environmental Enhancement Zone. That was a new one. "And you are?" I asked. She straightened as if the mountains themselves were judging her posture. "Meredith Blackwell, president of the Silver Basin HOA. And you, Mr. Carter," I said. "Elias Carter. Are trespassing." A breeze moved across the water, rippling the surface. Somewhere in the pines, a crow let out a dry caw, like it couldn't believe what it was hearing either. I held the deed out again. This is the only authority that matters here. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not recognition, but irritation. The kind a person gets when reality doesn't bend fast enough to their will. I suggest you leave before this becomes a legal issue, she said sharply. Our fines escalate daily. I folded the deed back into my jacket. Funny, mine don't. Her jaw tightened. What is that supposed to mean? But before I could answer, a gust blew across the lake, carrying the scent of cold mineral water and something else. Something faint, off, almost chemical. I filed it away. I'd come back to it. For now, there was only one question that mattered. Why was an HOA claiming a lake it had no lawful reason to touch? And why did Meredith look so confident doing it? I stepped back, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I turned toward my truck, calm on the outside, irritation burning like a slow fuse underneath. As I opened the door, her voice rang out behind me. Don't come back, Mr. Carter. This lake belongs to us now. I didn't answer, but the deed in my pocket did. And it was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced, one way or another. The next morning, the Wyoming air felt colder than it should have. A thin veil of fog hovered above the lake, curling lazily between the pines like it hadn't decided whether to rise or fall. I stood beside my truck, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, mentally planning the repairs I needed to make on the old caretaker cabin that came with the sale. The plan lasted about 30 seconds. The crunch of multiple tires on gravel reached me before I saw them. 3 SUVs, slick, polished, out of place in the wilderness, rolled to a staggered stop near the shoreline. Doors slammed in quick succession, and emerging first, wearing that same fuchsia windbreaker like a uniform, was Meredith Blackwell. This time she wasn't alone. 2 men in gray HOA jackets flanked her, stiff-backed, carrying clipboards thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. A sheriff's cruiser trailed behind them, red and blue bar lights off, but unmistakably present. From it stepped Deputy Harlan Pike, a man built like a fence post, thin, tall, weathered by Wyoming sun. Mr. Carter, Meredith called out, as if announcing a court hearing. Your presence at this lake is now a legal violation. She didn't wait for me to answer. Instead, she turned to one of the men beside her. He handed her a stack of papers the size of a Bible. These are emergency lake seizure orders, she declared, her voice slicing through the morning quiet. Signed and approved by Judge Hollings as of 6:42 a.m. today. The deputy cleared his throat. Ma'am, let's keep this professional. She cut him off with a sharp wave. Deputy, please do your job. Pike looked at me with an apologetic flicker, the kind deputies get when stuck between law and lunacy. You mind stepping over here, sir? I need to explain the, situation. I approached slowly, boots sinking into the damp dirt. My fingers brushed the deed in my jacket, its edges grounding me more than the cold earth beneath my feet. What situation? I asked. Pike scratched the back of his neck. The HOA filed for emergency stewardship over this lake. Claims the waterway is part of their, what did they call it? Community Enhancement Ecosphere. Judge Hollings signed off. I let out a breath. Deputy, this lake is on my deed. Meredith scoffed loud enough to echo. That deed is irrelevant. The Silver Basin HOA has jurisdictional priority. We amended our perimeters last month. I turned to her. You amended your jurisdiction to include property you don't own? That's how community governance works, she said, chin tilting toward the sky. We protect our land and our water. Your water? I asked. Yes, she snapped. Our water. The audacity sat between us like a dead trout. I pulled out the deed, unfolding it with the care one gives something both fragile and powerful. The sunrise caught the county seal, a golden emblem pressed deep into the paper fibers. "This document says otherwise," I said simply. The two HOA men leaned closer instinctively, but Meredith snapped her fingers without even turning. They straightened like trained animals. "I don't need to see your little document," she said. "The judge has already ruled." I looked at Deputy Pike. "And you? Do you enforce court orders without verifying property boundaries?" He hesitated, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "Judge Hollings is direct. When he signs something, we're expected to follow through." I studied his posture. He wasn't a bad man, just one stuck in a system that rarely questioned paperwork. "Deputy," I said, "if you want to see the deed, it's right here." He did. I saw it in his eyes, but he also knew who would suffer for challenging the HOA. Every deputy in a small town had learned that lesson the hard way. Before he could reply, Meredith stepped forward, holding up her stack of papers like a shield. "This is your final warning, Mr. Carter," she said. "Leave this lake, or we will begin issuing fines. The judge's order allows us to start at $2,000 per day." I smiled, not because any of this was funny, but because panic was something I'd learned to recognize in others. Meredith wasn't confident. She was desperate, overeager, rushing. People rush when they're hiding something. "Tell me, Meredith," I said quietly, "what's the real reason you want this lake?" Her face twitched, a small movement but noticeable. She recovered fast, shoulders tightening. "Reason?" she barked. "The reason is simple. This lake is part of our community heritage, and we won't let outsiders ruin it." Her emphasis on outsiders hung strangely in the air, more like a threat than a descriptor. The HOA men shifted nervously. The deputy looked at his boots, and for a moment, I felt the entire mountain ridge hold its breath. I folded the deed again, slipping it into my jacket. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Meredith sucked in a sharp breath. "You'll regret that decision." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Cold dread trickled down my spine as I answered. A voice whispered on the other end, fast, urgent, trembling. "Elias, it's Dorothy, the realtor." She sucked in air. "I shouldn't be calling you. I shouldn't be talking at all. But you weren't supposed to see them so soon." "See who?" I asked. A shaky exhale. "The HOA. They think the lake is theirs." A pause. "And they won't stop until they have it. All of it." I glanced at Meredith, whose eyes narrowed like she could hear every word. "What aren't you telling me, Dorothy?" I asked, stepping away toward the trees. "The man who owned the lake before you." Her voice dropped to a whisper so thin it barely carried. "He didn't die the way they said." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" Another pause, another trembling breath. "I have to go. They're watching me. But listen. Listen very carefully." Her voice cracked. "Check the water, Elias. That's where the truth is." The call ended abruptly. The forest felt suddenly heavier, the lake darker, the silence thicker. I turned back toward the shoreline. Meredith was smiling. Not a friendly smile. A knowing one. The kind people wear when they believe they're untouchable. The kind people wear right before everything begins to fall apart. Meredith held that smile all the way back to her SUVs. The engines vibrated against the quiet lake air as her entourage loaded up, doors slamming like closing statements in a courtroom I hadn't agreed to step into. Deputy Pike lingered a moment, giving me one last look, half apology, half warning, before driving off behind them. The dust from their tires settled slow, drifting over my boots like the first layer of a story being buried. But stories don't stay buried. Not out here. The moment their taillights vanished between the pines, the lake seemed to exhale. The wind returned, brushing the water into soft ripples. A loon called somewhere across the basin, a lonely sound that sent a chill down my arms. I walked the shoreline, passing the old pier, letting the quiet seep into my bones. Dorothy's whisper echoed in my mind. The man who owned the lake before you, he didn't die the way they said. I tried calling her back, straight to voicemail. I tried twice more. Same thing. Something in her voice, fear, guilt, maybe both, kept needling at me. Realtors don't stick their necks out, not when lawsuits lurk like shadows. If she broke her silence, something had pushed her far past her limit. I slipped the phone into my jacket and made my way toward the caretaker's shed near the tree line. The structure leaned slightly, roof sagging under the weight of time and cheap repairs. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of cold, stale air mixed with the woody scent of old cedar planks. Inside, dust motes floated like ash in a sunbeam. Stacked against the wall were a few plastic crates the previous owner had left behind. His name, Raymond Hollow, still marked the faded shipping labels in blocky handwriting. Dorothy said he didn't die right, but the county listed it as natural causes. Heart failure. Nothing suspicious. Nothing worth a second look. I crouched beside a crate half filled with lake equipment, nets, waders, a rusted lantern, and something else shoved into the corner, a waterproof case with a broken latch. Inside were 6 small plastic vials, each labeled in Hollow's handwriting. Sediment samples. Taken 1 fluent. Depth sediment samples. Taken 6 feet. Depth note. pH irregular. Testing again soon. I held 1 vial to the light. The sample inside wasn't the brownish tan of normal lake sediment. It was darker, almost gray, with tiny metallic flecks that caught the sun like bruised glitter. I didn't need a lab to know that wasn't right. A gust of wind rattled the shed walls. The lake lapped at the shore just a few yards away, as if urging me to pay attention. The water had looked normal that morning, but something in the air, some faint chemical bite beneath the pine, had felt off. I stood, grabbed a clean jar from the crate, and headed toward the edge of the pier. Kneeling, I dipped the jar beneath the surface. The water flowed in smooth, but when I capped it and gave it a light shake, small, filmy swirls clung to the glass, iridescent, faint, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. Dorothy was right. Something was wrong with the lake. The phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. Unknown number again. I answered. Dorothy? No. The voice was low, male, strained. Listen carefully. You need to stop collecting samples. Who is this? I kept my voice calm. Someone who's trying to keep you alive. A breath, shaky and fast. They know you bought the lake. They're furious about it. Who is they? Silence, a long one, broken only by the lapping of the lake against the dock. You've already crossed them without realizing it. Pack your things and leave tonight, before you end up like Hollow. The line cut. No click, no pause. Just silence. A crow screamed overhead, wings beating against a sudden gust of wind. The sky had darkened just enough to give the lake a colder shade of silver. I pocketed the sample jar and turned back toward the trail. As I stepped off the pier, the tall grass rustled to my right. A black SUV sat parked on the ridge, a different one from earlier. No HOA stickers, no emergency lights. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but I could feel eyes on me, watching, measuring, maybe waiting. My hand tightened around the jar of lake water. If someone wanted the truth buried here, they'd have to deal with the wrong man. I'd spent 20 years as a dam engineer, reading rivers, lakes, faults, and pressures. Water doesn't lie. It holds secrets until someone who understands it listens. And this lake was begging to be heard. As I walked back toward the cabin, the wind shifted again, carrying the faintest trace of something metallic, something industrial, something unnatural for a place this remote. Dorothy's final words circled back like a warning carried by the pines. Check the water. That's where the truth is. But she'd also said something else. They won't stop until they have it. All of it. Whoever they were, they'd made a mistake this morning. They'd shown their hand too early, and I was already following the trail. The real question wasn't whether the lake was hiding something. It was how deep the secrets went, and how far the people protecting them were willing to go. The next morning broke sharper than usual, the kind of dawn where the cold feels cleaner, like it's trying to wash away whatever shadows lingered the night before. Thin streaks of gold slid across the lake as the sun climbed the ridge. But something else climbed with it. Engines. Big ones. The ground vibrated under my boots before the sound fully reached the cabin porch. I stepped out with a mug of burnt coffee and watched dust rise from the access road like a storm cloud. 2 yellow bulldozers, a flatbed hauling steel beams, and behind them, 3 HOA SUVs led by a bright fuchsia jacket that could have been seen from orbit. Meredith Blackwell had returned. This time, she came ready for war. I walked down toward the shoreline, the cold wind whipping off the water and pulling the smell of pine across the clearing. The bulldozers rumbled to a stop at the edge of my dock, a small platform I'd inspected the day before. Weathered wood, a few replaced boards, nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. Trevor Blackwell, Meredith's husband, climbed out of the lead dozer. He was a thick man with a permanently flushed face, the type whose temper arrived 3 steps ahead of his common sense. His hard hat might as well have been a crown the way he carried himself. Behind him, a younger deputy stepped out of a patrol car. Caleb Ross. I'd never seen him before. Dark hair, thoughtful eyes, posture that said he wished he were anywhere else. Meredith stepped forward as if she owned the entire state. "Mr. Carter," she called, "you have approximately 5 minutes before we begin removal of all illegal structures on HOA property." I shook my head. "We're really doing this at sunrise?" "Criminal violations don't take naps," she snapped. "Neither do bulldozers, apparently." Trevor grunted like a man eager to swing a hammer, just to hear something break. "Let's get this over with," he muttered to his crew. Deputy Ross approached me, hands tucked near his belt, but not in a threatening way. "Sir, I just need to confirm something. Meredith says the dock is on HOA water." "It isn't HOA water," I said. "It isn't anyone's water except the man who owns this deed." I pulled the folded document from my jacket. Ross leaned in to look, but Meredith darted between us like a striking hawk. "You don't speak to him," she hissed. "He's in violation. The judge already ruled." Ross frowned. "I haven't seen the ruling. You don't need to. You're here to observe, not interfere." Her tone turned sharper when she faced me. "Mr. Carter, you were warned. This dock is illegal. The fines started at midnight, and any attempt to obstruct removal will be added to your charges." "Charges?" I asked, raising a brow. "For a dock that's grandfathered under county code from 1984? Her left eye twitched, just enough for me to see the crack in her confidence. Trevor climbed onto his machine again. The bulldozer engine revved, sending a deep tremor through the earth. Birds scattered from the treetops. "Start the first pass," Meredith shouted. Caleb stepped forward. "Ma'am, don't you think we should at least check the paperwork before—" "We don't check," she snapped. "We enforce." I pulled a small digital meter from my jacket pocket, the one I'd used the day before. "Before you bulldoze anything," I said, "you might want to see this." Meredith's nose wrinkled. "What is that? A toy?" "pH meter," I said. "Lake water isn't supposed to measure acidic levels, but this lake does." Trevor scoffed. What, you're a scientist now? No, I said quietly. Just a former dam engineer who knows when a waterway is sick. Meredith stepped closer, ready to fire off another insult, but I held the meter up. The screen flashed a number that made Caleb's eyes widen. Far outside the safe range. What the hell? He whispered. Meredith waved dismissively. We don't have time for your theatrics, Mr. Carter. You should make time, I said, because whatever your HOA is doing here, it's affecting the lake. Trevor leaned out of his bulldozer. Lake's fine, and once we clear your junk, it'll be even better. Then it happened. A short burst of static crackled from his radio. He pressed the side button. Copy, he said. We're already here. A pause. His face paled, just a shade, before tightening again. Understood. He looked down at Meredith. He says we finish this today. Meredith stiffened. The senator wants it done. He gave a slow nod. For a moment, just a flicker, fear crossed her face. Ross caught it too. Senator, who? He asked cautiously. Meredith instantly recovered. That is not your concern. It is mine, I said, especially if someone higher up is trying to steal my property. Trevor raised his hand to signal his crew. The bulldozer roared forward. Caleb stepped closer to me, not aggressively, but protectively. Mr. Carter, he murmured, I'm not here to pick sides, but maybe you should step back. If they destroy that dock, I said, they're destroying evidence. Evidence of what? I nodded toward the pH meter still blinking ugly numbers in my hand. Whatever they're dumping into the lake. He swallowed hard. Caleb, Meredith snapped. Move out of the way! He didn't move immediately, and that hesitation, the smallest act of doubt, sent visible panic across her face. Trevor revved the bulldozer louder. But fate intervened first. A gust of wind blew across the lake, carrying with it the strongest whiff yet. That same metallic bite masked under crisp mountain air. Caleb smelled it too. He frowned toward the water. What is that? He asked. None of us answered, because none of us had to. Whatever was happening to the lake wasn't natural, and someone with enough power to involve a senator, was desperate to hide it. Caleb stepped back, troubled. Meredith waved her clipboard like a weapon. Enough delays! Take it down, Trevor! The bulldozer lurched forward. I stood my ground, heart pounding, jaw clenched. We need to talk, I told Caleb, handing him the meter, but not here. He hesitated, then pocketed the device. Trevor reached for the lever. And in that moment, every instinct I'd honed over 20 years working with water told me one thing. Whatever they were trying to bury went deeper than the lake bed, and it was rising fast. The bulldozer's engine thundered forward, drowning out the calls of waking birds and the soft rush of the morning wind. The machine's steel treads chewed into the dirt like teeth. Even the lake, the calm mirror of Wyoming sky, seemed to recoil from the noise. But then, abruptly, Trevor stopped the dozer. Not because he had second thoughts, not because of Meredith's frantic hand signals, but because something shifted in the air. A smell, a cold, chemical odor riding the breeze like a ghostly warning. Trevor swore and pulled his shirt up over his nose. Meredith froze mid-step. Caleb's eyes darted between the lake and the machinery. I didn't wait for their next move. I stepped back from the shore and walked toward my small boat, an old aluminum craft that Hollow had left behind. Nothing fancy, but reliable. The kind of boat that had seen more dawns than most people do. The lake was waiting. Leaving them behind, I pushed off the gently creaking dock, the oar slicing the thin skin of the water. Ripples echoed out toward the trees, each one bending the reflection of the sky into shaken glass. The farther I moved from the shore, the quieter everything became. It was eerie, unnatural. No fish breaking the surface, no insects skipping across the water. Not even the soft lap of waves against the hull. Just a cold, still hush, like the lake was holding its breath. A place can feel alive. It can also feel abandoned. And this lake felt abandoned. Halfway across, I stopped paddling. The silence pressed closer. Even the wind, which had been following me earlier, seemed to hesitate before crossing the basin. That's when something caught my eye. Near the northern inlet, half hidden beneath a fallen pine, stood an old shed Hollow used to store gear. I'd only glanced at it yesterday during the initial walk, but something about it had seemed off. Too clean, too recently disturbed. Now, from the boat, I could see it clearly in the morning light. The padlock was broken, not rusted, not weathered. Broken. Recently. I turned the boat and paddled toward shore, each stroke cutting through the heavy stillness. Wet sand sucked at my boots as I stepped out onto the bank. The quiet here felt different, closer, more watchful. The shed loomed just 20 feet away. Birds should have been nesting on the rafters. Insects should have been crawling along the beams. But there was nothing. Even the air felt unnatural, still and slightly metallic, like the breath before a lightning strike. I reached the doorway. Inside, dust drifted across slanted beams of sunlight. Old fishing rods, broken crates, a dented fuel can. Hollow's old workbench sat against the far wall, paper still tacked to the corkboard above it. But what drew my attention was the stack of sediment jars on the shelf, not the ones I found yesterday. These were newer, labeled in Hollow's handwriting. April 11th. Depth 8 foot. Dangerous. April 14th. Depth 9.5 foot. Worse. April 17th. Do not tell them. April 20th. pH spike again. Needs reporting. My stomach tightened. Whatever Hollow discovered here, he hadn't kept it a secret. At least not willingly. A creak sounded behind me. I spun around. Nothing but wind nudging the shed door, but the unease stayed. I leaned down and picked up one of the jars. The sediment swirled sluggishly, same sickly gray as the samples in the caretaker shed. Something glittered within it, small reflective flecks that caught the sun like broken shards of metal. Industrial, artificial. Someone had been dumping something into the lake, something that didn't belong anywhere near a waterway. Hollow had caught it, and someone hadn't wanted that. I placed the jar into my coat pocket and stepped out of the shed. The lake lay open in front of me, gleaming but lifeless. My breath fogged in the cold morning air as I scanned the tree line. That's when I saw it. A black SUV, parked on the ridge, silent, unmoving, watching. Same one from yesterday. The windows were so dark, they looked painted. But even from down here, I could feel the gaze behind them, like a weight pressing on my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number again. I answered. A single sentence came through the line. No greeting, no hesitation. Stop investigating the lake, Elias. The voice was the same one from yesterday. Calm, menacing, measured. And if I don't, I said quietly, you won't like the attention you start drawing. I didn't reply. Leave the lake, the voice said, or you will end up like him. Hollow? I asked. Silence. Then, a soft click. The line went dead. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a faint chemical smell across the water again. The lake rippled, not from my movement, not from wildlife, but like something deep beneath the surface stirred. Watching, waiting, covering its tracks. I stood there until the SUV backed up the ridge and disappeared behind the trees. Only when its engine faded did I release the breath I'd been holding. Whatever was happening here wasn't small-town HOA nonsense anymore. This lake was sick. Hollow knew it. Someone wanted the truth buried, and now they were watching me. The pines whispered in the cold wind as I turned back toward the cabin, sample jar heavy in my pocket. The lake wasn't just holding secrets. It was begging to be heard. And I was already listening. By late afternoon, a gray sheet of clouds rolled over the mountains, dimming the lake into a muted mirror of the storm that hadn't quite arrived. The air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. I spent an hour organizing Hollow's notes and jars, spreading them across the old workbench inside the cabin, like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. The sediment samples told a story, but a buried one. Chemical irregularities, dates getting closer together, warnings scrawled in handwriting that grew more frantic with time. Whatever he found wasn't a slow problem. It was accelerating. Thunder grumbled far off in the distance. The storm was coming, and so was something else. A soft knock tapped at my cabin door. I tensed immediately. After the warnings, the SUV, and the morning confrontation, nobody knocking out here was good news. The nearest house was miles away. Neighbors didn't just drop by. I opened the door slowly. An elderly woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a tan wool coat, gray hair tucked beneath a knitted hat. Her cheeks were windburned, but her eyes, sharp, alert, studied me with a mixture of urgency and caution. "You must be Elias Carter," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "That's right." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. "My name is Martha Redding. I live on the West Ridge. Used to know the man who owned this place. May I come in?" I stepped aside. Something about her posture, nervous but determined, told me she wasn't here for pleasantries. Once inside, she kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting someone to follow her. "I saw the bulldozers this morning," she said quietly. "Saw the HOA out there raising hell." She removed her gloves, hands trembling slightly. "And I figured, if you're still standing after that, you deserve to know what's going on." I motioned for her to sit. "I'm listening." She opened a worn canvas satchel resting at her side and pulled out a stack of photographs, old ones, faded around the edges, but recent enough to matter. She spread them across the table like grim postcards. Dead fish washed ashore in piles, strange barrels being unloaded from a flatbed in the middle of the night, pipes running under the waterline near the HOA's private gazebo, and one picture that made my breath catch. Hollow himself, standing near one of the hidden pipes, pointing toward the water like he was trying to document something important. "He told me he'd found evidence," Martha said, voice cracking. "Said he'd take it to the county. Said people needed to know." She swallowed hard. "A week later, they found him in his cabin. Coroner called it natural causes." I stared at the photos. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said without hesitation. "Not for a second." Lightning flickered outside, painting her face in silver blue. "Why didn't you come forward before?" I asked. Her shoulders slumped. "Because I'm 73 years old, Mr. Carter. I know power when I see it. And those people, the HOA, they're protected in ways I'm not. Folks around here who speak up end up fined, harassed, pushed out of their homes. Some disappear." "Disappear?" She hesitated, lips pressing together. "There was another woman, Lydia Hammond, lived by the marsh. She tried to report chemical runoff to the county. Her house burned down 2 days later. Fire marshal blamed faulty wiring." She shook her head. "She told me she didn't even own a microwave." The storm outside deepened, wind rattling the cabin windows. Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't just an HOA problem. It goes higher, much higher." "Higher?" I asked. "How high?" She hesitated only a moment before saying the name like a curse. "Senator Vance Blackwell, Meredith's brother." My jaw tightened. I remembered the radio transmission, Trevor saying, "The senator wants it done today." The pieces clicked together with awful clarity. The HOA wasn't fighting to keep a lake. They were cleaning up after someone powerful, too powerful to get caught dumping chemicals into protected water. "Why would a senator be involved in something like this?" I asked. "Because his agricultural company produces industrial fertilizer by the ton," Martha said. "And proper disposal costs money, millions. But if he can make it disappear into lakes like this," she spread her hands, "well, that's profit." I glanced back at Hollow's jars lined on the workbench. The metallic flecks, the acidic readings, the chemical smell that drifted across the lake. Fertilizer runoff, illegal dumping, environmental crimes, covered by an HOA acting as the enforcement arm, all protected by a judge willing to sign anything put in front of him. My stomach churned. Martha leaned forward, pulling out one final photograph. This one showed a narrow pipe running under the gazebo, freshly installed, unseen from above. "I took this 3 months ago," she whispered. "And that smell you've noticed? It's stronger at night. They release it when nobody's watching." "But someone was watching," I said quietly, looking toward Hollow's samples. She nodded. "And he paid the price." Lightning flashed again, bright enough to illuminate the entire room. When the thunder followed, it shook the windows. Martha gathered her coat. "I shouldn't stay longer. If they see my truck here—" "They?" I asked. She gave me a look filled with years of fear and hard-earned wisdom. "They always watch, Mr. Carter. Always." I walked her to the porch. The storm had finally broken, the rain falling steadily across the lake, smearing the reflections into streaks of gray. Martha paused at the steps, clutching the railing with trembling hands. "One last thing," she said. "If you really want to understand what's happening, look under the gazebo. That's where they feed the lake." Her eyes darkened. "And that's where they fed Hollow his fate." Then she hurried down the path and disappeared into the curtain of rain. I stood there long after she left, letting the storm soak into my coat, listening as the wind dragged the lake into restless waves. Somewhere across the basin, the wooden gazebo stood in the gloom, hiding the pipe she described. Fresh chemical drip disguised beneath cedar planks and fairy lights. Lightning illuminated it briefly. Lonely, silent, deceptively innocent. My hand tightened around the railing. Whatever secrets they'd buried under that gazebo, they were about to meet daylight. And I was done letting them hide. The storm passed overnight, leaving the air washed clean but heavy with the smell of wet pine and upturned soil. Morning sunlight broke through in patches, glinting off the lake's uneasy surface. The water looked calmer, but the chemical sheen, faint, thin, almost imperceptible, still drifted across it like an oil painting gone wrong. I stood at the edge of the dock with a thermos of coffee, eyes fixed on the gazebo sitting across the water. A pretty structure if you didn't know better. Fresh cedar planks, decorative railing, string lights draped along the roofline. The kind of lakeside charm HOAs love to brag about. But beneath it lay a pipe that didn't belong there. A pipe Hollow died trying to expose. I rowed across while the lake was still waking. Oars dipped quietly into the cold water, sending ripples across the mirrored surface. The air held that early morning stillness where sound travels farther than it should. Even the creak of the oarlocks seemed too loud. By the time I reached the gazebo, the sun had pushed above the ridge, painting the structure in soft gold. I tied the boat to a post and stepped onto the platform. The wood was damp and smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something sharper. Chemical residue. Martha had been right. I knelt and ran my fingers along the underside of the railing. Damp. Slick. And when I held my fingers to my nose, there it was. That same metallic, artificial scent from the lake. I looked around, making sure I was still alone, then pried up one of the lower corner planks with the small crowbar I'd brought. The board groaned, splintering slightly before popping free. Beneath it lay a dark cavity, and there, half hidden in shadow, was the pipe. New, modern, industrial. A thick black conduit disappearing straight down into the lake. My breath caught. This wasn't runoff. This wasn't accidental contamination. This was an active feed, a direct line for dumping. Careful not to disturb anything, I took out my phone and began recording. Slow pans, close-ups, every angle documented. I slid the crowbar deeper and revealed another inch of pipe. Metallic flecks clung to its surface. It matched the sediment jars perfectly. "Got you," I said under my breath. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I resecured the plank and pushed off from the gazebo, rowing back across the lake with a knot in my chest. The truth was rising, and it was uglier than anything I'd expected. But I still needed proof powerful enough to shut them down for good. Back at the cabin, I grabbed my truck keys and a map, then headed toward town. The county building sat 30 miles away, a modest brick structure with a flag that snapped in the morning breeze. Inside, the hallways smelled like old paper and waxed floors. The clerk at the records office was a sandy-haired man named Paul, who looked like he'd been sorting files since the Eisenhower administration. His voice was soft, worn down by years of misplaced forms and complaints about septic permits. "What can I help you with?" he asked. I slid Hollow's oldest note across the counter. "I need everything on this lake. Historic records, ownership logs, old federal surveys, water rights declarations." Paul adjusted his glasses. "Silver Basin Reservoir?" "No," I said. "Hollow Lake, Parcel 11B. He paused, then frowned. "Hasn't been called that in years." "Names don't change the land," I said quietly. "Just the people claiming it." He studied me for a moment before sighing and disappearing into the back room. Drawers clattered, paper rustled. A fan buzzed somewhere overhead. When he returned, he carried a stack of dusty boxes so high he had to balance them on his knee to set them down. "Everything we have," he said, wiping his hands. "But you'll want this one first." He slid a thin brown folder across the table. An old federal document lay on top, yellowed with age, but stamped with a seal that had outlived generations of county officials. United States Department of Interior Wildlife Monitoring Designation. Issued, October 12, 1958. I froze. I read it twice, then 3 times. The lake, my lake, had been federally designated as a protected wildlife monitoring site, and beneath the fine print were the words that changed everything. Federal oversight supersedes county and local authority. Designation remains active until formally revoked by Congress. My heart kicked hard. This designation had never been revoked. The HOA had no jurisdiction here. The county had no jurisdiction here. Not even the state could override it. And anyone dumping chemicals into this lake, anyone forging seizures, anyone falsifying maps, they weren't just violating property laws. They were committing federal crimes. I read the document again, my breath steadying. Everything clicked into place. Meredith's arrogance, Trevor's bulldozers, the judge's reckless orders, the senator's involvement. They thought nobody would ever check the old files. They thought Hollow's death sealed the past. They thought buying the judge and intimidating residents would be enough. They were wrong. I photographed every page, every line, every signature. Then I gathered the copies, stored them carefully in my pack, and left the office with one thought echoing in my head. This wasn't a local fight anymore. I drove straight to the ridge overlooking the lake. The afternoon light shimmered across the surface, but the beauty felt different now, stronger, older, protected by law older than any HOA. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I filmed. found the name I hadn't used in a long time. Aylin Pierce, Senior Attorney, DOJ Environmental Crimes Unit. I called. She picked up on the first ring. "Elias," she said, "I didn't expect to hear from you again." "I need your help," Omari said. "It's urgent, and it's federal." There was a quiet pause. "What did you find?" "A lake," I said slowly, "that someone's been poisoning." Another pause. Longer this time. "Tell me where you are," she said. I did. Then she said the words that sent a chill deeper than the mountain wind. "Do not confront them. Don't talk to the HOA again. Don't touch anything else. Stay exactly where you are. We're coming." The line clicked off. I lowered my phone and looked across the water. The lake's surface rippled slightly, almost as if exhaling. The truth was finally moving into daylight. And now, so was the law. The sky over the lake had sharpened into a pale, brittle blue, the kind Wyoming gets right before trouble. Pine needles shimmered with leftover rain, and the wind combed through the valley like a warning hand. I stood on the dock, gripping the federal designation document in my pocket, the paper thick, old, and powerful. But the HOA arrived before the DOJ did. Of course they did. The first sign was dust, thick clouds of it rising over the ridge like a wildfire. Engines growled, tires skidded. Then the convoy appeared. SUVs, golf carts with lights zip-tied to the roofs, and a rented box truck covered in banners reading Silver Basin HOA, Community Safety Operation. Community safety. I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny about what came next. Meredith Blackwell climbed out of the lead vehicle wearing a fuchsia jacket, even brighter than before, like war paint for someone who'd never been in a real fight. Her hair was pinned so tight it looked painful. Behind her marched the HOA board, all in matching jackets, clipboards under their arms like weapons. "Mr. Carter?" she shouted the moment she spotted me. Her voice ripped across the lake like a crack in the ice. "You were ordered to vacate our property. You are now in direct violation of our emergency enforcement codes." I stepped off the dock slowly, boots hitting the damp earth with a steady thud. "You don't have enforcement codes," I said. "You don't even have jurisdiction." Her eyes sharpened. "Judge Hollings disagrees." "Judge Hollings signs whatever you hand him," I said. "But federal law isn't so flexible." For the first time, her expression faltered. A tiny flicker, a crack in the paint. But she recovered fast and motioned to the box truck. "Bring it out!" The back doors swung open. 3 hired security guards in tactical vests unloaded portable metal barricades, floodlights, and a stack of bright orange signs reading, HOA Restricted Zone. Trespassers will be fined. They began forming a perimeter around the lakefront, my lakefront, as if preparing for a siege. A neighbor stood on the ridge watching. Martha. She clutched her coat with both hands, fear etched deep in the lines of her face. Trevor Blackwell stomped out next, hard hat crooked, boots muddy, radio clipped to his shoulder. He was wired with that same restless energy, anger mixed with fear, all simmering in a man too simple to hide it. "Get the dozers ready," he barked at his crew. "We finished the job today. I don't care if this man built the dock with his bare hands. Tear it out." The engines roared to life. Again. Caleb Ross arrived moments later in his cruiser, stepping out with a tight jaw. He scanned the barricades, the bulldozers, the crowd gathering behind Meredith. "This isn't how things are supposed to work," he muttered. "Talk to your judge," I said. "I'm starting to think I should," he replied. Overhead, a long strip of HOA-approved paper crinkled in the wind, some absurd banner reading, "Protecting our environment together." The irony was so thick it coated the back of my throat. A loudspeaker crackled. Then Meredith's voice filled the entire valley. "Attention residents! A hostile trespasser is attempting to sabotage Silver Basin environmental protections. This individual is endangering the community. The sound bounced off the water, rolling through the pines. People began emerging from their homes on the far ridge, drawn by the noise. I shook my head. You really don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, she snapped. A man who thinks he can hide behind forged documents and scare tactics. Forged documents. She had no idea. I removed the folded federal designation from my jacket and held it up, letting the morning sun catch the gold seal. The old paper looked almost regal against the modern chaos behind her. This, I said calmly, is a Department of Interior designation from 1958. This lake is federally protected land. Your HOA has no authority here. None. She didn't even look. She waved her hand dismissively. It's fake. Caleb stepped closer. Meredith, maybe we should verify. She spun on him. Your job is to enforce the judge's order, unless you're choosing to join the violator. The board members murmured. Trevor smirked. The guards shifted their weight, reassured by her false confidence. I slipped my phone out and hit REC. Say that again, I said quietly. Her chin rose. This man is a trespasser. Tear it all down. Trevor raised his arm to signal the dozers. The earth trembled as the machines pushed forward. Martha shouted from the ridge, Stop! You people have no right! Meredith turned the loudspeaker her way. Return to your home, Mrs. Redding, before we issue fines for interference. The old woman stepped back, shaking. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something colder, steadier. The moment felt heavy, like the lake itself was leaning forward to hear what came next. Trevor shouted, Dozers advancing! But before the steel could bite into the earth, I stepped in front of the dock and held up the federal document higher. If you destroy anything here today, I said, my voice cutting the air clean, you are destroying federal property. The bulldozers hesitated. Trevor shouted again, louder. I said advance! The first dozer lurched, and then the sky changed. A low rumble rolled across the basin, deeper than thunder. The kind of sound that makes people instinctively look up. The kind that vibrates in your bones before your mind fully registers it. Meredith stiffened. Trevor stopped mid-command. Caleb's eyes widened. I turned toward the mountains. A dark shape swept over the ridge, then another, then a third. Rotors, big ones, the unmistakable thunder of incoming helicopters. Wind from their approach swept across the lake, scattering ripples and sending papers flying from HOA clipboards. Martha clapped a hand to her mouth. People on the ridge froze. Trevor stumbled back against his bulldozer. And Meredith, the queen of Silver Basin, lost every ounce of color in her face. The DOJ wasn't coming. The DOJ was here. The helicopters broke over the ridge in a staggered formation, 3 dark silhouettes slicing across the morning sky. Their rotor wash churned the lake into frantic waves and sent pine branches whipping wildly in every direction. Loose papers from the HOA clipboards scattered like startled birds. Even the bulldozers seemed to recoil, engines rumbling in uneasy hesitation. For a moment, the entire valley fell into an awed, breathless silence. Then the first helicopter began to descend. Its skids touched down in the clearing near the shoreline. My shoreline. With the heavy precision of a federal hammer striking an anvil. The dust cloud that rose swallowed half the HOA board in a gray haze. Meredith stumbled backward, shielding her face. Trevor swore under his breath, stepping away from his bulldozer like it had betrayed him. The side door slid open. A team of agents in dark tactical vests stepped out. Organized, efficient, moving with the kind of confidence only federal jurisdiction could provide. Their patches read DOJ, Environmental Crimes Unit, in bold yellow letters, and at the center of them was Aylin Pierce. She strode across the clearing like she'd already won the case. In a sense, she had. The early sunlight glinted off her badge as she pinned it to her vest. Her boots sank slightly into the damp earth, but her presence didn't waver. She scanned the lake, then the bulldozers, then the barricades, and finally the HOA crowd frozen in mid-chaos. Her eyes locked on me. "You did the right thing calling," she said with a nod. Meredith rushed forward before I could reply, her voice shrill with desperation. "Excuse me! This is private HOA business. You can't just—" Aylin held up a hand, calm but commanding. "Ma'am, this is a federally designated waterway under federal protection. You have no jurisdiction here." Meredith blinked, then laughed, high, brittle, disbelieving. "That man is lying! He forged those papers! This is our lake!" Aylin reached into her vest and pulled out a tablet. A high-resolution scan of the 1958 federal designation filled the screen. She rotated it so Meredith could see. "This is the original document from the Department of Interior Archives," Aylin said. "Unaltered, verified, still active, and superseding any local or municipal claims." The color drained from Meredith's face so fast it looked like someone pulled a plug. This can't be right," she whispered, but the faint quiver in her voice told the truth. Trevor pushed past the board, fists clenched, face red. "Who the hell do you think you are? You don't walk in here and shut us down." Aylin didn't flinch. "That's exactly what we do," she signaled to her team. "Secure the perimeter. Document everything. Nobody leaves." The valley exploded into motion. Agents fanned out with cameras, testing kits, evidence bags. 2 approached the bulldozers, placing official evidence tags on their frames. Another team took samples from the lake while a technician unpacked drones, launching them toward the gazebo. I watched the HOA members shrink into themselves as the truth settled around them. Heavy, inescapable, undeniable. Caleb Ross stepped toward Aylin. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "Judge Holling signed an emergency seizure order. We were told—" "That order," Aylin interrupted, "is already under federal review, and so is the judge." Caleb swallowed. "So, what do you need from me?" Aylin regarded him for a moment. "Honesty." He nodded slowly. "You'll get it." Behind us, 2 agents approached Meredith. "Mrs. Blackwell," one said, "we need you to come with us." She lifted her chin, but it trembled. On what grounds? Environmental violations, interference with federal property, obstruction, potential racketeering, and pending investigation, conspiracy to defraud, and conspiracy to contaminate protected waterways. Her knees buckled just slightly. Trevor stepped in as if to shield her. "You can't arrest her. She's the HOA president." Aylin's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Her husband," he snapped. "That explains a lot," she murmured. Then she raised her voice. "Mr. Blackwell, step aside." He didn't. 2 agents moved in, not roughly but firmly, guiding him away. Trevor lunged. "Don't touch me! You have no idea who we know." Aylin nodded to an agent. "Restraining protocol." Trevor froze. His chest rose and fell like a cornered bull. Sweat dripped down his temple. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back. An agent turned to the HOA board. "Everyone here will be questioned. Nobody leaves the area until cleared." Martha Redding stepped down from the ridge, her hand pressed over her heart. "Bless you," she whispered. "Bless every one of you. They've been hurting us for years." Aylin softened. "We'll take your statement, ma'am, and thank you for your courage." Caleb approached with the pH meter I'd handed him before. "This belonged to Hollow," he said quietly. "He was a good man. We all knew something wasn't right when he passed." Aylin accepted the meter, her expression tightening. "That matches the results from our preliminary water tests." Thunder cracked. Not from the sky, but from another helicopter arriving, followed by black SUVs barreling down the access road. More agents, more equipment, more authority than Silver Basin had ever seen. The HOA members stood pale and trembling. Aylin turned to me. "Carter, we need your documentation. Everything you've recorded. Everything you found." I pulled the sample jars, Hollow's notes, my photos, and the video footage from the gazebo out of my pack. "It's all here." She nodded solemnly. "Then we can finish what Hollow started." At that moment, an agent approached. "Ma'am, Judge Hollings is in custody." Aylin exhaled. "Good. And the senator?" "En route. Attempted to leave his office. Stopped by federal marshals." Meredith let out a strangled gasp. Trevor staggered. Caleb shut his eyes. The truth had surfaced, hard, sharp, and unforgiving. One by one, the HOA members were guided toward the waiting SUVs. Their clipboards dropped to the ground, papers fluttering like broken wings. As Meredith was escorted past me, her voice cracked. "Who are you, Carter? What are you?" I met her gaze, shaky, desperate, defeated. "I'm the man who bought the lake you tried to steal," I said, "and the man who watched you bury a good person's work." Her face crumpled, not just in fear, but in understanding that her kingdom had collapsed before her eyes. The helicopters thumped overhead, their shadows crossing the lake like passing judgment. Aylin placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ready to share the evidence?" she asked. I nodded. "Let's end this." The words felt heavier than the morning mist rolling across the lake, but they were true. Everything that had been buried, Hollow's warnings, the poisoned water, the fake seizure orders, the judge's complicity, had finally broken the surface. Aylin motioned me forward, and together we walked toward the temporary DOJ command tent set up near the shoreline. Agents moved around us with quiet purpose, collecting sediment samples, photographing the bulldozers, questioning HOA board members one by one. Every few yards, yellow evidence flags fluttered softly in the breeze like small, stubborn reminders of the truth. Inside the tent, long folding tables held laptops, secure storage boxes, and rows of labeled containers. The air hummed with the sound of portable generators and the low murmur of agents consulting their screens. The smell of wet earth mixed with coffee from a metal thermos someone had left uncapped. Aylin cleared a space on the nearest table. "Let's see what Hollow found." I placed the sample jars down gently, each one clinking faintly against the metal surface. Hollow's handwriting, shaky, pressured, urgent, looked back at us from the faded labels. "Depth 6 feet. pH irregular. Do not ignore." And that last one, "Do not tell them." Aylin exhaled slowly. "He knew." "Yeah," I said. "He did. And they knew he knew." She nodded once, jaw tightening with quiet resolve. I handed her my phone next. Every video, every photo, every recording since the first HOA confrontation. She scanned through clips of the gazebo pipe, the chemical sheen spiraling through the water, Trevor ordering the bulldozers forward, Meredith accusing me of forgery with the judge-approved documents still in her hand. Then she paused. "This one," she said, rewinding the clip. "The pipe feeding into the lake. You caught the serial marking on camera." The drone technician, a young man with cropped hair and an intense focus, leaned over her shoulder. "Ma'am, that marking belongs to a commercial-grade waste distribution system. Same manufacturer tied to 2 prior EPA investigations in Oregon and Nebraska." "That's enough for a warrant on their equipment," Aylin said. A warrant wasn't just a warrant out here. It was justice catching up. "Let's proceed to seizure," she told the team. While the agents worked, I stepped outside the tent. The storm clouds from earlier had thinned, revealing patches of clean blue sky. Sunlight shimmered across the lake, scattering the last hints of ripple left by the helicopter landings. For the first time since moving here, the water didn't look hostile. It looked tired, but hopeful. Behind me, someone approached. I turned to find Martha Redding making her way down the small slope, her wool coat pulled tight, her boots kicking up gravel. She moved slowly, but her steps were steady. "Is it done?" she asked, voice trembling. "Almost," I said. "They're collecting the last samples now. The senator, the judge, they can't bury this anymore. They'll be held accountable." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. Hollow tried to stop them. I kept telling him he was putting himself in danger. He always said truth didn't survive in shadows. I placed a hand on her shoulder. He was right. And he didn't die for nothing. Before she could respond, an agent approached us. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "we're ready for your statement whenever you are." She took a deep breath and looked at me. "I'm ready." As she walked away with the agent, I turned back toward the water. The lake lapped softly against the shore, the sunlight reflecting off it like a promise kept. Hours passed. DOJ vehicles came and went. Helicopters lifted off, carrying evidence toward federal labs. The HOA board members, Trevor included, were driven away one by one, hands behind their backs, faces pale as ghosts. Meredith went last. She didn't look at me. She stared at the ground, her fuchsia jacket now dull and dirty against the dust. By late afternoon, the valley settled into a deep, relieved quiet. Aylin approached, brushing dust off her vest. "We're setting the motion to dissolve the HOA immediately. Given the evidence, the judge will have no choice but to sign off." "What about the lake?" I asked. "It'll receive full federal remediation," she said. "Funding pulled from seized assets. The senator's accounts are already frozen. We'll restore the ecosystem, enforce all protective laws, and ensure no one tampers with this lake again." Her next words carried a softness I didn't expect. "And we want you to serve as the voluntary steward of the site. You understand water. You understand this place." A slow warmth settled in my chest. "I'll do it," she smiled. "I figured you would." By evening, most of the vehicles had left. Only a handful of agents remained, gathering equipment and packing final evidence crates. The sun dipped low, painting the ridgeline in warm orange and pink hues. I walked back to the dock, feeling the boards flex softly beneath my weight. The scent of wet pine drifted across the breeze. Fish broke the surface for the first time in days. Only tiny ripples, but they were there. Signs of life returning. Dorothy Lane arrived near sunset, parking her old station wagon with a squeal of brakes. She hurried down the path, relief flooding her face. "I came as soon as I heard," she said. "Are you all right?" "I am," I said. "And the lake will be too." She looked across the water, her eyes softening. Hollow would have been proud. We stood together in silence for a long moment. Finally, she squeezed my arm. "Thank you. Truly." When she left, the valley slipped into dusk. The lake darkened into a calm mirror reflecting the first stars. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp Wyoming air fill my lungs. The lake was mine, not just by deed or ownership, but by justice, by effort, by truth fought for and won. A gust of wind rippled across the surface, carrying with it the faint smell of cedar and clean water, a promise that the scars beneath were already beginning to fade. I stepped to the end of the dock, the boards warm beneath my boots from the last touch of sunlight. The lake stretched before me, wide and quiet, newly freed. "No one will ever poison this water again," I whispered. And for the first time since arriving here, the lake whispered back through its gentle waves, not in fear or sickness, but in peace. Justice wasn't loud. Justice wasn't flashy. Justice was this. A quiet lake finally breathing again. If you've ever stood your ground against unfair power, drop a simple yes in the comments so others know they're not alone. And if stories about fighting for your land and your dignity speak to you, stick around and subscribe. There's plenty more truth and justice on the way.